The village square bustled with life as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Vendors lifted the shutters of their stalls, arranging baskets of fruit, spices, and bolts of cloth with practiced hands. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from the ovens, mixing with the sharper tang of herbs and the sweet smoke of roasting nuts. Children darted between stalls, their laughter echoing as they chased each other across cobblestones worn smooth by generations. In the middle of it all stood Ian, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the crumpled letter clutched in his hand. The words on the page still burned in his mind, though he had read them 100 times already. His fingers trembled slightly, not from the morning chill but from the weight of the message. People brushed past him, strangers wrapped in their daily worries, yet for Ian the square no longer felt familiar. The letter had changed everything. It spoke of secrets buried long before he was born, secrets that demanded he leave the life he knew behind. For the first time, the lively sounds of the village felt distant, muffled, as though he were already standing in another world. Inside the old library, silence ruled like a patient guardian. Dust drifted lazily in shafts of sunlight that broke through narrow stained glass windows, painting the wooden floor with fragments of red and gold. Rows of towering shelves leaned with the weight of centuries, their spines cracked, their titles long forgotten. Ian moved carefully through the aisles, his boots echoing against the stone floor as if afraid to disturb the slumbering knowledge within. At the far end of the room lay a desk cluttered with scrolls and brittle pages. He set the crumpled letter down beside them and slowly unfolded the map he had discovered. Its parchment was yellowed, the ink nearly faded, but the drawings were unmistakable. Rivers curled like veins across the surface, mountains were sketched with jagged strokes, and in the center of it all stood a symbol, a serpent coiled around a star. Ian traced the shape with his fingertip, a shiver crawling down his spine. It was the same mark mentioned in the letter, the same mark whispered about in old bedtime stories his grandmother used to tell. But now it was no story. The map pulsed with mystery, daring him to follow. Somewhere beyond the familiar fields of his village, the path of the serpent awaited. Why dusk? The forest loomed ahead, its massive trees crowding together as though to guard the secrets within. Their branches stretched high, twisting into one another, weaving a canopy so thick that little of the evening light reached the ground. Ian paused at the edge, lantern in hand, the flame trembling against the wind. He could still hear the faint echo of the village behind him, but with every step forward, that comfort slipped further away. The deeper he walked, the stranger the forest became. The air was damp, carrying the earthy scent of moss and wet bark. The trees whispered with voices not carried by the breeze, their leaves rustling in patterns too deliberate to be chance. Every crack of a branch beneath his boot made him tighten his grip on the lantern, every flicker of light seemed to carve strange shapes from the shadows. Once, he thought he saw eyes glinting in the darkness, yellow, watching, but when he raised the lantern high, nothing remained but tangled roots and hollow trunks. He pressed on, but unease coiled in his chest like a knot. This was no ordinary forest. It was alive in a way he had never known, and it felt as though it was watching him take every single step. A sudden storm broke without warning, the first drop of rain striking Ian's cheek like a cold finger. Within moments the skies split open, pouring sheets of water through the canopy. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the ground, and lightning tore across the sky in blinding flashes. The forest, already strange and whispering, now felt hostile, its shadows lengthened by the fire of the storm. Ian shielded his lantern beneath his cloak, though the flame sputtered dangerously with every gust of wind. He stumbled along the slick ground, boots sinking into mud, his heart pounding louder than the storm itself. Then, as another bolt of lightning cracked open the heavens, he saw it. On the ridge above him, framed in the stormlight, stood a figure cloaked in silver. The rain slid off the shimmer of the robe as though it dared not touch him. He was tall, unmoving, a silhouette carved from something both human and otherworldly. In his hand, he held a staff that hummed faintly with power, its crystal tip glowing even against the violent flashes of the storm. The figure's eyes caught Ian's gaze, two pale orbs that glowed faintly, unblinking, piercing through the downpour. For a breathless moment, the storm seemed to hush, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Ian felt his chest tighten. He didn't know if he was staring at a savior, a guardian, or a harbinger of doom. By the time Ian reached the river's edge, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with mist and the scent of wet earth. The river roared before him, swollen by the rain, its waters churning with a furious, unnatural force. Foam hissed over jagged rocks, and the current clawed at the banks as if desperate to pull anything, anyone, into its depths. Ian hesitated, the lantern light reflecting weakly against the rushing water. The crossing seemed impossible. One misstep and he would be dragged under, lost before his journey had truly begun. His mind urged him to turn back, to return to the safety of the village, to forget the letter, the map, and the stormlit figure watching from the ridge. But the words of the letter echoed in his thoughts, only by crossing shall truth be found. He closed his eyes, steadying his breath, and let the weight of those words anchor him. His grandmother's stories returned, tales of heroes who braved impossible trials not because they were fearless, but because the path left them no choice. Tightening his grip on the map, now sealed safely within his cloak, Ian stepped forward. The icy water bit at his legs, surging against him with terrifying strength. He forced himself onward, each step a battle against the river's pull, every heartbeat louder than the rush of water. Somewhere beyond this furious current, answers waited for him, and he would not turn back. When Ian finally pulled himself onto the far bank, he collapsed against the wet grass, his chest heaving, limbs trembling with exhaustion. The river behind him still roared like a beast denied its prey, but he no longer listened. His eyes were fixed on the sight rising before him out of the mist. The temple stood vast and ancient, its stone walls carved into the shape of mountains, as though it had grown out of the earth itself. Vines coiled along its pillars, and moss softened the edges of its weathered steps, yet the structure radiated a strength untouched by time. At its great gates, towering higher than any tree, the serpent and star symbol was etched deep into the stone, each line glowing faintly as though alive with hidden fire. Ian's heart hammered as he rose to his feet, his soaked clothes clinging to him like a second skin. This was no ruin of forgotten gods, it was a place that still breathed with purpose, waiting. Every story, every whisper, every riddle of his childhood had led here. The temple was not just a destination, it was a threshold. As he placed his hand on the cold stone of the gate, the symbol seemed to pulse. Beneath his palm, the mist thickened, curling like smoke around him, and the air grew heavy, filled with a silence so complete it pressed against his ears. Ian's breath caught. He knew in that moment that what lay beyond these doors would either grant him the truth he had sought, or end everything he was.